fascinating player. I mean, that's exactly what the tennis world needed. Very charismatic, a joy to watch. You know, he's a real artist.
It's April 20th in Monaco, the sun is blazing over the clay, and Carlos Alcaraz has already broken serve in the opening game of the Monte Carlo final. The crowd is electric, everyone in that stadium fully expects to watch a coronation, and why wouldn't they? Alcaraz came in as the defending champion, sitting comfortably at world number 1, carrying a 21-2 record through the 2026 season. A man who had just made history at the Australian Open by completing a career Grand Slam faster than any player in the Open.
He wins it.
And you think he should not? Why? But because it's not always
has shown that there is a small separation between those two players and the rest of the field, and now it's about to start.
Panera. And on the other side of the net stood Jannik Sinner, who hadn't played a single point on clay all year before that week, who had spent the previous months dominating hard courts in California and Florida, and by every logical measure this match had only one reasonable ending, Alcaraz lifting the trophy in front of his adoring crowd. But sport doesn't care about logic. And what happened next is the reason we need to have this conversation right now, because 5 consecutive games slipped away from Alcaraz like sand through his fingers. Sinner closed out a 7-6, 6-3 victory, and walked off the court as the new world number 1, and Alcaraz, standing at the net, said something that stopped everyone who was paying close attention. He looked at Sinner and said, "It is impressive what you are achieving right now." And the moment those words left his mouth, you could feel something shift. Because champions don't usually say that to the opponents they expected to beat. And Boris Becker, the man who won 6 Grand Slams and built one of the most celebrated careers in tennis history, had been warning people about exactly this moment for months, and almost nobody listened. So today we're going to listen, because Becker has identified something about this rivalry that goes far deeper than rankings, Grand Slam counts, or head-to-head numbers. And once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. Let's go back to the beginning of what Becker actually said, because his words have been floating around in press conferences and podcast snippets without anyone truly connecting the dots. And the quote that matters most, the one that reframes this entire rivalry, is this. Becker described Alcaraz and Sinner as fire and ice, and then he said something that cut right to the heart of it. He called Alcaraz an artist of the game. Someone charismatic and thrilling, exactly what tennis needs, and then he said he sees no weaknesses in Alcaraz, but that artists need a source of inspiration, and he believes Sinner is that source for Alcaraz. Now read that again slowly, because on the surface it sounds like a compliment, and in many ways it is, but buried inside it is one of the most unsettling observations anyone has made about a top player in years. Because what Becker is really saying is that Alcaraz's ceiling depends on external fuel, that he needs Sinner's presence, Sinner's pressure, Sinner's cold precision to unlock the absolute best version of himself, and the problem with that is devastating in practice, because Sinner doesn't wait around for Alcaraz to feel inspired. Sinner just plays, relentlessly, clinically, without emotion, without flinching, and if Alcaraz hasn't found his spark by the time Sinner has settled into his rhythm, the match is effectively over before most people in the crowd even realize what's happening. To understand why this matters so much you have to look at the 2025 Wimbledon final, and this one genuinely still hurts if you're an Alcaraz supporter, because the conditions going into that match were almost perfectly designed for him to win. He had beaten Sinner in straight sets at the Italian Open just weeks earlier. He had shared one of the most breathtaking 5-set battles in Roland Garros history with Sinner and come out on top. The entire tennis world was calling it the match of the decade. Alcaraz was the 2-time defending Wimbledon champion, the crowd was behind him, the grass was his playground, the momentum was his, and yet Sinner won 4-6, 6-4, 6-4, 6-4. And here is the thing that Becker noticed that most people completely glossed over. Sinner didn't win by playing more brilliant tennis than Alcaraz, he won by taking away the court. He absorbed that first set, made one tactical adjustment, and then spent the next 3 sets methodically eliminating every inch of space that Alcaraz needed to create. The angles disappeared, the drop shot windows vanished, the speed changes that make Alcaraz so unique and dangerous were neutralized because Sinner was moving into the ball so early that by the time Alcaraz executed the shot, Sinner was already positioned for the redirect, and Becker summed it up beautifully when he described it as calm precision defeating creative unpredictability, and on that day, on that grass, calm precision won because Alcaraz simply Could not find his inspiration when Sinner refused to give him anything to react to. No openings, no errors, no emotional cracks, just relentless controlled aggression. And without a canvas to paint on, Alcaraz's artistry had nowhere to go. Then came the 2025 ATP Finals in Turin, and this one added another layer to the pattern. Both players had been absolutely flawless throughout the week. Alcaraz had carved through the group stage and the semis without dropping a set. Sinner had done the same. The final looked perfectly balanced on paper, and yet Sinner won again, 7-6, 4-7, 5-7, and claimed his second consecutive title at the ATP Finals. And Becker said something on his podcast around that time that deserves far more attention than it received. He pointed out that Sinner had reached the final of all 4 Grand Slams in 2025, the Australian Open, Roland Garros, Wimbledon, and the US Open, a feat that had not been achieved in the modern era of men's tennis. And while Alcaraz had beaten him in 2 of those finals, the sheer consistency of Sinner showing up on the biggest stage every single time, without exception, was being massively underreported because the tennis media was too busy celebrating Alcaraz's spectacular moments to notice the quiet, almost eerie reliability that Sinner was building. And Becker was frustrated by that, because he understood from his own playing days that the most dangerous opponents aren't always the flashiest ones, they're the ones who never crack, who show up the same way every single match, who make you feel like no matter what you throw at them, they'll simply absorb it and throw it back harder. Now before we go any further, we have to address the 2025 US Open final, because if you're building the case against everything being said here, that matches your strongest argument, Alcaraz dismantled Sinner 6-2, 3-6, 6-1, 6-4. It was a masterclass, genuinely one of the most complete performances of Alcaraz's career. The variety was stunning, the serve and volley was sharp. The changes of pace were relentless, and Sinner had no answer for any of it. But Becker, watching from the sidelines, wasn't just celebrating Alcaraz's brilliance, he was noting something else entirely. He was watching Sinner's first serve percentage hover around 48%. He was watching Sinner's baseline game become unusually readable, his patterns predictable, his mental sharpness clearly dulled. And Becker remarked afterward that he had expected more from Sinner, that Alcaraz had evolved while Sinner had in that particular match stagnated. And then Becker said something that is the key to unlocking this whole rivalry. He said you knew exactly what was always going to happen with Sinner that day, meaning Sinner had become predictable, and here is the inversion you need to sit with, because it changes everything. When Sinner is not predictable, when his mental edge is fully intact and his patterns are impossible to read, that is when Alcaraz's dangerous variety gets suffocated, that is when the artistry has nowhere to breathe. So the US Open victory wasn't just proof that Alcaraz can beat Sinner, it was actually a roadmap for exactly what Sinner needs to be to make Alcaraz's life miserable, and Sinner clearly read that roadmap and applied it at Wimbledon, the ATP Finals, and Monte Carlo. Becker also made a point about the rest of the field that ties everything together in a way that's almost uncomfortable to think about. He publicly called out 9 players: Zverev, Draper, Fritz, de Minaur, Ruud, Rune, Medvedev, Rublev, and Khachanov, and essentially said they had mentally surrendered before matches against Alcaraz and Sinner had even begun, that they were satisfied reaching quarterfinals. Content being the 3rd or 4th best player in the room, and Becker framed this as the central problem in men's tennis right now. But the deeper implication for Alcaraz specifically is this: when the rest of the field mentally taps out before they even walk on court, Alcaraz coasts through tournaments without ever being truly challenged, and then Sinner arrives in the final, completely focused, ice-cold, absolutely ready. And suddenly Alcaraz is facing a completely different level of resistance that he hasn't encountered in 5 straight matches, and his competitive instincts, never fully sharpened during the week, are not ready for it. And Becker compared it directly to his own rivalry with Ivan Lendl, the unflashy machine who kept delivering in the biggest moments, while Becker, the crowd's darling, the instinct player, occasionally found his artistry neutralized by someone who simply refused to be impressed by it. And Becker said he understands that frustration from the inside, the maddening experience of having your most brilliant shots absorbed and returned without any acknowledgement of how good they were. And for Alcaraz, who feeds on energy and atmosphere, facing an opponent genuinely unmoved by his genius is the hardest psychological puzzle on the tour. Becker did offer one sliver of tactical hope. He praised Alex's approach in the 2025 US Open semifinal against Sinner, Noting that Alex had done something most of Sinner's opponents refused to consider, she played flat and fast, avoiding long baseline exchanges, attacking the net with purpose and aggression, and Becca's reaction was almost one of relief, saying finally someone has actually thought about how to be dangerous to Sinner rather than just hoping their usual game would be enough. And he pointed out it wasn't complicated strategy, it was logical. Don't let Sinner grind you down from the baseline where his consistency is unmatched. Take the ball early, flatten it out, and take away his time. And the painfully revealing follow-up question that hangs in the air after hearing that is, if that's the blueprint, then why, in Wimbledon and Monte Carlo and the ATP finals, was Alcaraz spending critical moments in extended baseline rallies with the one player on tour who thrives in exactly those rallies? And the answer Becca only hints at is the one that's most difficult to accept, that in those moments against Sinner, Alcaraz is not fully choosing his shots, he's reacting, searching for inspiration that hasn't arrived yet, waiting for something to click that Sinner is specifically engineered to prevent from ever clicking. So where does this leave us heading into Roland Garros 2026? Because that's the question that actually matters right now. Sinner has reclaimed the #1 ranking after Monte Carlo. He now owns 4 consecutive Masters 1000 titles, an unprecedented achievement in the ATP era. And if he wins Madrid, he would become the first man ever to win 5 Masters titles in a row. Alcaraz, meanwhile, is heading to Barcelona as defending champion, carrying a 21-3 record and honest self-reflection after Monte Carlo. His post-final words were notably clear-eyed, saying he didn't play well in the important moments and that Sinner played unbelievable tennis when it counted. And what makes those words significant is that they mirror almost word for word what Becca had been analyzing for months: the important moments, the biggest points, the highest pressure situations. That is where this pattern lives. And Alcaraz knows it now in a way that feels different from knowing it intellectually. His felt it in his body, standing at the net in Monaco saying something you don't usually say to opponents you expected to beat, and Sinner's own comment after Monte Carlo revealed just how seriously he takes this rivalry. He said Alcaraz would come back better for their next match, and that wasn't generosity, that was a self-issued warning, a reminder to himself not to exhale. Because he knows better than anyone that the moment he stops expecting Alcaraz's absolute best is the moment the 2025 US Open happens again. And the clay season is just beginning. Barcelona will tell us whether Alcaraz can rebuild his confidence without needing a dramatic comeback to find his rhythm. Madrid will likely give us a preview with real psychological stakes. And then Roland Garros will be the moment where everything either crystallizes or fractures, where we find out if Becca's identified issue is a permanent feature of this rivalry or something Alcaraz has genuinely solved, because Becca was the first to say it out loud and Monte Carlo was the latest proof that he was right. Sinner has found a way to reach into Alcaraz's brilliance and quietly turn down the volume, and the most compelling question in tennis right now is whether Alcaraz finds the switch to turn it back up before they meet on the red clay of Paris.